Well, look at the time. We'll get everybody on here and then we'll get started. Start the recording. So here's what we got. Okay, going into this week, the focus is going to change. You guys should be pretty solid on the doors, actuators, generally like what we talked about, how to diagnose actuators, or door problems. And then we got into automatic, which typically I find fairly easy to understand. There's going to be a little bit of touch-up review on all these, but the big thing we're going to get into now is, and we'll cover some stuff with hybrid, but the focus is actually going to be more on diagnosis. So I'm going to jump way down here, and I'm going to go through a diagnostic scenario with you, and then you guys are going to do 10 of them. We'll do one together, so technically you're doing 9, but we'll call it 10. And then what we're gonna do is come back and review them. Okay, so we'll do this one together. You'll see right on Canvas here. You're gonna need 2 things. We're gonna download this. All right. So this is the appendix and the 752 simulator resources. Because I already have it, I just wanted to show you how to download it. And this is the reference. And let me pull this up. I've got it on PDF. Okay, so this is what you're about to download. This is going to give you, like, for example, this chart, you could actually Google this fairly easily, but also um, you could take this and you could screenshot or print this and hang on to it. It's a good thing to keep in mind. So this is just looking at R134A temperature and pressures. So remember when we go up to the car and we check the static pressure? So if you want to check the static pressure, you just hook the gauges up. You wouldn't start the car or anything. And then you'd look at how many PSI were in it and compare that to the temperature. So let's say, what temperature you guys think it would be at the school right now? We're not there, so we could guess.
Like 80 degrees.
All right, so if it was 80, would you agree would be right about here? I'm gonna go ahead and do a quick annotate. If we're about 80, would be right about here. Run that up. Once that hits this line, then you come over like this. Then if you figure out where this should be, so like this is probably 65, 77, 80, 85. No, this would be 70, this would be 80, this would be about 90. So at 80 degrees, it should be 90 PSI. All right, so if we hook up to the car and we've got 90 PSI static, it's reasonable to believe it's charged. Sometimes it's not 100%. Like sometimes there's cars with moisture and air in them, and that will kind of make a pressure. So it would say that there's pressure in the system, but there might not be enough refrigerant. But that's kind of rare. So generally, if you hook up gauges to a car and it reads around what it should on this chart, you can tell whether it's charged or not. Now, let's say it's a little more extreme. Let's say it's like 100. If you look, 100 would go to here, 100 would go over. 100 outside would be like 110, 120, almost 130. So it's not to say that at 70 degrees, it should have 70 p. Well, it is true, actually. If it's 70 degrees, look, 70, and then run it over. That's literally 70 degrees. So if it's 70 degrees, it should have 70 PSI. But if it's 80 degrees, it shouldn't have 80 PSI. If it's 90 degrees, it shouldn't have 90. If it's 100, it shouldn't have 100. This curve is parabolic. It's like an exponential curve. So 70 and 70 is true. But 80 should be a little higher. At 90, it should be even higher. At 100, it should be even higher than 100 PSI. Makes sense? So that was the first thing we wanted to reference. And you have access to this. So again, you go ahead and you download it and you can use it to diagnose customer cars, or you can diagnose it to use this simulator, which I find to be um, really fun, and it helps you to get your diagnostic brain thinking. So this is running through explaining to you some of the things that you could do. However, probably, and this will give you all the different explanations of where the points are, but I feel like for the most part, that's fairly self-explanatory. Our next step, so you're going to download that. Our next step is going to be to download the actual worksheets right here, and it's in order. You go here and it says to download the worksheets. You can download them. Because I have them, I'm gonna go ahead and pull them up. Pull them over here. Actually, you know what? That was not the right folder. Simulator. There we go. Should be popping up in Adobe. Second, which put it down here. So it's gonna pull it. Probably be me being difficult. Okay, so this is gonna be your actual work. So you're gonna download these worksheets. You don't need to print them though, but this is gonna give you all the details. And then it's gonna tell you go to this site, and you're gonna actually go to that site. So I'm gonna click that. And you've got two options. One, you've got electrical. And if anybody is still, wants electrical practice, I can give you the information, the worksheets and the diagrams for this. But we're focused on AC. So here's AC. And then if we pop those worksheets back open, we're going to look at bug number 1. It's telling us it's a 2012 FJ Cruiser. The concern is customer states AC does not work. The conditions are 95 degrees outside, bright sunshine, 75% relative humidity. That would actually suck right there. 75% humidity at that temperature, that's rough. You're talking like Houston there. Houston, we have a problem. Just saying. And then diagnosis based on the pressure gauge readings, etc. Basically do the diagnosis. You got 4 options: no refrigerant, open coil in the magnetic clutch relay, in-op condenser fan, or the system is overcharged. Okay, so just remember those for a second. We'll go to this one, and then we need to go to bug 1. All right, here's bug 1. We've walked out to the vehicle and we've put the gauges on. Can anyone tell right now if I have the AC turned on or off, or what do you think?
AC is not on.
I agree. So we could begin with any different types of diagnosis you want, but typically it's a good idea to start, if it's a customer car, one of the first things you could do is check to see if it works. Would you agree? So we would jump in the car, we put on the AC. And then how would you do a performance test on this? Anybody remember? Give it to me.
You'd like stick the fan in front of the car and run the AC for a few minutes and have the thermometer in the center vent.
Technically, yeah, I'd probably skip the fan part, because really it should be able to make pretty good AC without the fan. Now, if you wanted to be really thorough, you could use the fan, but the reason I don't use the fan is if there is an issue with this vehicle's fan and I put a big fan in front of it, I'm basically masking the problem. So I would do everything except for just the fan. So I'm gonna take this thermometer right here. I click the thermometer and I hit the center vent, and it's blowing at, what would you call that? Somebody who hasn't answered yet would be a hog. Somebody new. How's this AC working?
Are those the fence?
Yes, exactly. So Good point. This is where we measure the vents, right here. Correct. And do you see what the temperature reads? When I picked up the thermometer, showed me the temperature. I could put on multiple points. But if you look, the first thing we do is just measure the air coming out of the vents. What would we call this? Is it blowing warm, cool, hot, cold? Is there a better term we could use? What's the temperature outside? Do you remember?
Ambient temperature.
Yeah, I agree. It's blowing ambient. So as soon as a car is blowing ambient, that should put your brain in a mode of like, okay, I don't think the AC is working at all. Make sense? And then who could tell me what maybe your next step may be? And there's not necessarily to say there's a right and a wrong, but we generally want to we want to do as few tests as possible. So if you do things in an order that saves other steps, then that's the right way, the most efficient way. Make sense? So what will we do next? Let's see. Yeah, you could do pressure on the gauges. That's one thing you could do. Can anybody think of something we can do visually that would be even quicker? And I'm good with the pressure on the gauges. So if you want to do that, look, it's already done for you. The gauge is already on there. But what else could we look at that doesn't even take tools, except for maybe a flashlight?
Could you look at the compressor?
Exactly. So we're looking at this compressor. The outside of this compressor is turning, but the inside isn't. And so it's a little bit hard to animate that. So like just as an experiment, let's go to bug 4. This is a compressor that's working. Can you see that? So on bug 1 with the AC on, is the compressor working? Yes or no? Is the clutch engaging, in other words?
No.
I agree. So let's stop and think for just a second. If the clutch is not engaging, based on those diagnoses that we did together, what do you think are the possible causes? Let's go ahead and we'll even actually go ahead and list them. List me the causes here. Anything that would cause the clutch not to engage. Let's make a list.
Low refrigerant.
I agree. What else?
Maybe it's not getting power.
I agree.
The clutch itself is bad.
Agreed. And some of these might kind of overlap. So, quote unquote, if it's not getting power, what could cause it to not get power?
Ground.
Okay. Let's see how would I word that. Clutch. No ground. True. True. A fuse.
Bad relay.
The relay. Now, low refrigerant is true, but how does the vehicle know it has low refrigerant?
The pressure switches.
Right? So wouldn't you agree the pressure sensor or switch could cause it? So even just with this much, would you guys, is it safe to say we have a lot of possibilities right here? Just because that clutch doesn't kick, you can't guess. If we've listed only these, I'll add a little bit more about the AC button or DTC set in the ECU. Issue with ECU or control panel. What are we up to? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 issues. And we didn't even really look that hard, right? So if we have 10 potentials, you need to not be guessing here. What you've done so far is great. You know you know that the clutch is not working. Very nice. I'll delete that. It's kind of weird. See if I hit this X button. No, if I turn the text box off. No. Here. Yes. All right, so you have too many possibilities here. Let's just pick one that we can eliminate. Anybody pick one. I want a few people to pick one.
Power?
Okay. And I agree. Luis, how would you verify that?
Either the fuse or the relay?
Yeah, but how would you verify it? You tell me components, tell me your test, tell me what you do.
You could just check if it's getting voltage at the fuse or just swap out the relay.
True, you could do a relay swap. You could check voltage at the fuses. Anything that's a little more to the point, right? Because you want to eliminate a lot of things in one swoop. You can check the relay, I agree. You can check the fuse, I agree. But you could check something that would have checked both of those.
We can test the compressor if it's getting voltage and ground, so power and ground.
Okay, right at the compressor. That kind of makes sense to me. You could go ahead and do that. You could also, if you guys were picking up on what we were doing when we were doing that diagnosis together, you can also feel and test and play around to see if that relay's clicking. If the relay's clicking, that means the control side of the circuit is working. If the relay is not clicking, that means something is not activating the relay. So like you could go in two directions. So if the relay is clicking, then you're really gonna have to go and check for voltage at the compressor. Totally agree. If the relay doesn't click, however, then you may have to start looking into other things, right? So like, let's just say, let's just say that it didn't click and we thought it might be low on refrigerant. What would we do to verify the refrigerant level?
Well, checking the pressure.
Exactly. And we got that. So what do you guys think about these pressures right here? I'll remind you, look at the pressure. It's what's that about 110? I don't know. Probably about 105. No, this is over. It's about 112. I'd say about 112. So at 112, and we can pull up our sheet here. At 112, we can look at what should it be. Annotate. At 110, 15, 20, 25, 30. Yeah, so you're about right here. Or make a straight line, which is then right about here. What should our pressure be? 110. Oh, sorry, I think, yeah, that's right in line. What would you say that is? Do you guys agree? About 150? All right, so it should be 150. Now, I wouldn't go like, totally committed to that, but I'd say, yeah, of course it left my line there. And I have to delete that. So if we've got a 150, we came up with about, it should be 150, huh? It's 95. If we read that right, 90, 95, 100. Yeah, maybe not more. All right. What do you guys think about the charge level?
It's low.
Seems like it's low, huh? Now let's take a quick peek at those at the worksheet. Does it is it low an option? undercharged, right? That'd be how the ASE would call it, undercharged. Is undercharged an option?
No.
It's not, but actually I like that you found something there. I do tend to think it's probably a little bit low. But when it's a little bit low, that's not enough to cause what we have. Make sense? So you may have found a problem, and I agree with, we found a problem, I agree. However, cars have multiple little things wrong, right? So if a customer comes in and their AC doesn't work at all, and you find that their system is slightly undercharged, slightly undercharged goes more with like the AC blows cool but not cold. Slightly undercharged doesn't make the compressor not work, right? So that's why I really like these simulators. So I agree we found something. Now, if it's like this has over 100 PSI, that's enough to get the compressor to kick. That compressor should run. Why else would the compressor maybe not run? Now let's take a peek at those other possibilities, just as a reminder, right? So you could look at those and say, oh, okay, all right, all right. Does it seem like it's overcharged? We were expecting 150 and it's only got like 113, so definitely not overcharged. Now, and I see that in the chat. If we were looking at this, what we would do on the customer car might be slightly different. But in this, we can exhaust all of our resources. We've already checked a bunch of temperatures. And it's ambient everywhere. Then we can put a scan tool on. Right here's the text stream. Put the text stream on there. GTS Plus. So cool. And you can see the relevant data. Evaporator temperature sensor is 95. Does that temperature sensor make sense to you? Think 95 is accurate, inaccurate? Because remember, it's a thermistor. We talked all about thermistors, how resistance in the circuit or a defective thermistor can make the temperature reading incorrect. You could also have a evaporator temperature sensor that was supposed to be probed into the evaporator, and instead it's laying in the HVAC box, right? So does 95 make sense? Anybody want to tell me what you think? I'll give you a clue. I measured the temperature with the thermometer and it's 95. So that sensor's reading perfect. Now, what about the PSI? Regulator pressure sensor. So this is a pressure sensor. It's saying 114 PSI. Does that pressure sensor seem logical? Think that's accurate? Because that's about what we got when we hooked the gauges up. So we're just checking like, are the inputs and the sensors seeming like they're okay? Now the flow sensor at 41.14 volts, we don't have a ton of information on that. But remember, a sensor generally, that's a 5-volt sensor, is generally between a half and about a 4.5. So 4.14 is in the range of a half to 4.5. That makes sense. And then the regulator control current 0 amps. Well, we could go really in detail on that, but for now, let's just say the compressor clutch isn't kicking on. These look okay. The refrigerant level looks at least fairly charged, maybe a little bit low. But does anybody notice something here? What's happening here? The green AC light is flashing. That's interesting. Do you guys learn about that in the reading a little bit on the Toyota manual? A code would be on a new system, yes, but on an older system before they set DTCs, this was like more of an indication of a fault. This is saying there's a problem in the circuit with the AC compressor clutch. We don't know exactly where in the circuit, and unfortunately can't do voltage readings. So we've done as much diagnosis as we can. And if you look right here, let's take a look at our options. Actually, delete this. Can anybody give me one thing that we can eliminate?
The system being overcharged.
True. How do you eliminate that?
Because of the static pressures.
Agreed. Eliminated. Anybody else? Somebody new? Yeah, and Renee agreed, eliminate that one. Edward, you're saying easy, but I don't hear you coming up with an elimination. Aiden is gonna eliminate number one. So here we are at an open coil, a magnetic clutch relay, or an op condenser fan. One and four, because we hooked the gauges up, we know what we got, right? That would be a good thing to know. Now, how can we eliminate that? I mean, in real life, look at it, right? On this, we actually can't necessarily look at it, but if that fan was in op, what would happen? And you're right, the fan in op generally won't affect anything to do with the compressor. But if that fan was in op, what might I notice? Right? First off, the fan's in op, it's not gonna cause the compressor clutch not to work. But if the compressor clutch was operating and it was just a fan, the engine would tend to be overheating, and we could get the temperature thermometer, and we could go ahead and we could hit these, and these would be like super high, right? So if the temperature is hot, the pressure is high. That's physics. That's the relationship. Temperature is hot, pressure is gonna be high. So we could check the temperature and we could check the pressure, and you know what? They look fine, so we got no reason to think that condenser fan is an issue. So I would go ahead and say there was one left, wasn't there? Open coil in the magnetic clutch relay is the correct answer. Congratulations to everybody who saw that through. Now, for you guys, this is the deal. These aren't really tough, but what you're gonna do is go ahead and do these, and you can fill them out. Make a little note, make a little cheat sheet, jot it down. And then when you're done with the 10, you're gonna come in here and you're gonna go to that quiz right here. And you're gonna do this. It doesn't give you the words here. So if you're looking for the words, you don't get it from the quiz. You got to follow the worksheets. What did we pick? I think it was number 2. Wasn't it 2? I do believe. Yeah, open coil magnetic fan clutch in the magnetic clutch relay. Cool. Kenny, that's okay. You can have the quiz open, no problem. It's not, you're allowed to have it open forever, but now you know exactly what to do on it. So you're gonna do one at a time. So like for the next one, just because we're here together, I'll give you a preview. Bug 2. This has different numbers, 105 outside. Ooh. And turn the AC on. And I definitely saw some action there. So with it off, we got these static pressures. With it on, we got these running pressures. 200 on the high, 22 on the low. Compressor runs. Performance test. Yeah, but it's blowing crap. That's not very cool, right? Is 83 degrees ambient though?
No.
Correct. So the customer's concern, if you were to look at the worksheets, would be probably slightly different. Customer states on hot days, the driver's side does not cool. You're like, what the heck? It's crazy, right? So you're gonna go through, and this is a Highlander. He's gonna go through, do all 10 of them. I'm gonna say it shouldn't take you. It should definitely be under an hour, but to make sure that everybody gets a really good shot at this, let's go. It's 5:40. Let's reconvene at, let's say, about I'll tell you what, at 6:10, I'm gonna send out a message on the chat and just say, is anybody still working? Because I want to give everybody enough time, but I don't want to waste time either. Okay, so I'm gonna give you 30 minutes. Go ahead and do those. I can also watch to see when the quizzes are done, but I'm gonna communicate with you on the chat, all right? It already is 29 minutes because it's 5:41 now. So we're looking to come back at about 6:10, okay? 6:10, you guys work on those, get your thoughts together, and then we will reconvene. Any questions? Alrighty, get busy. Going to pause. Here we go. So, you guys, we will start off with two since we were on one. Right off the bat, anybody want to take a poke at what the first step would be for car number two in your method of diagnosis? Anybody for a step one? Okay, I'll be step one. I'm gonna turn on the AC, get the temperature like we did, and I'm gonna measure. 76, that's not good. It's not horrible, not good. 83, 87. You guys notice something? It's starting cooler and getting warmer from the right side to the left side. Now, if you recall on the, sorry, that's the chart on the questions. The customer did state, on hot days, the driver's side does not cool. So the passenger side is cooler than the driver's side, and we tested that, and that's accurate. Well, that's kind of interesting. Right, so you can come over here. If you guys would like, you can shoot that temperature gun all over the place and measure all sorts of stuff and things, but really we are pretty decent. Other than the thing to point out is even the evaporator core itself starts out cold, gets a little warmer, warmer, and then it's pretty warm by the time it's coming out of the evaporator. To be quite honest with you, that's actually all you need if you really understand AC to diagnose it. However, we'll go a little step further. So we could look at the static pressure. And remember, it's 105 outside, 100. So these are like 101, 102. So if we were to punch that into our chart, it's 105 outside. Let's do a little check here. I think this is 90, 100. 105, I think is going to be about here. Should be getting a temperature of what? About 110, 120, 130. Should be around like a 130 ambient, 130 static pressure. Anybody remember what we are? Anybody remember? Maybe not. So if we were to look here, we're about 102. It already sounds like we might have an undercharge issue, but we won't commit to that. Let's look at some options. Undercharged, air, regulator control, evaporator temperature sensor. Anybody want to take one of these that we can for sure knock right off the list, and how?
We can take out air in the refrigerant system.
Okay, and what would air in the refrigerant generally show?
It would it would show high pressure on both sides.
So sometimes I'd like to even jump a little bit further on that because I've seen that firsthand. If you were to kick the AC on and there were to be moisture in the system, a lot of times what you'd see is, let's say you picture like a little like blob of water, right? On the low side, if the water's here, it's kind of going through. Then all of a sudden it hits the high side. And when it hits the high side, a lot of times it'll boil it. And then that becomes like a big a steam, right? If you picture the steam, that's like a big air pocket. You'd actually see your high side needle jump up at that point, and then when the moisture leaves, goes on the low side, you'd see your high side needle drop down. You could see a couple things with that. You could see that high side needle oscillating. You might even see there's enough moisture in the system. The high side will spike so high, it'll do that. We talked about that overpressure relief, the little blow off valve. It might spit refrigerant out periodically out the overpressure relief device. And then if we have moisture in the system and it hits the cold, what do you think happens to moisture when it hits something that was this temperature? What's that TXV temperature? 120 going in, 27. So if water hits 27 degrees, what happens to it?
It freezes.
Right, so it's possible that ice could build up on this TXV. Ice building up is gonna cause, some intermittent issues, so it's an interesting one, but it doesn't really fit the whole like, oh, it starts cool and then it blows warmer gradually. That just doesn't fit, so I'd agree with that. We can eliminate that one. What else could we eliminate here? Let me ask you what I really want to ask you. Who can tell me how we can eliminate number one?
By checking the temperature of the evaporator compared to the sensor using thermometer.
True. So we go ahead and we jump in here and we say, hey, let me check that temperature. And I grab the tool and I say evaporator is about 54 to 64. I jump on the scan tool. The scan tool says evaporator is about 59. It's right exactly where it should be. But how would you do that on a real life car for a customer? You're not gonna strip the evaporator out of it and check it with a temperature sensor, with a thermometer. How would you do it? Yeah, so you jump on the scan tool and how do you know what it should be? How do you know what it would be? Well, I'll challenge you a bit. How about this? If you left the car sitting and let everything equalize in temperature, don't you think you'd have a baseline? Outside, what's the ambient temperature? The ambient temperature is 105. I'm sorry, that says. So if you left the car outside in 105, don't you think the evaporator temperature sensor should read 105? Right? Don't you think your intake air temperature, if you left it off long enough, don't you think your coolant temperature, your cabin temperature, you can check all temperature sensors at the same time if you let everything equalize to the ambient temperature and you know what temperature that is. Cool. So you could test it on a customer car just like that. So now we've eliminated a couple. I agree with your eliminations. So if we really want to focus on, it's either undercharged or the regulator current is too low. And I shy away from the regulator current just a bit because the regulator current is what's going to be, a variable displacement compressor. And that could be potentially an issue, but that one's a little more complex. That one's going to take a little bit more thinking and really understanding and, reading about the system. So that could be the problem, but if you want to get good at diagnosis, you need to learn this method. Keep it simple, stupid. Yes, it could be something complex, but don't you dare even think about making it a big complex problem when you haven't checked the basics. So remember this undercharged one? Didn't we kind of already verify it is undercharged as a matter of fact? Right? Look at it. We were supposed to have like 130 PSI and we had 102, 103. It's undercharged. What's interesting when something's undercharged, you have a limited quantity of refrigerant going through the system. If it's undercharged, yeah, the refrigerant enters the evaporator and it does, as you can see, amazing things. And it makes it, oh, it's pretty cool. And then by here, it's already kind of evaporated. And then by here, all the refrigerant's already evaporated. We no longer have, goes back to week one, we no longer have all that latent heat pulling, being transferred into the refrigerant through the change of state. You remember that? when that refrigerant is evaporating, it's grabbing a bunch of heat. But you don't have a whole lot of refrigerant in there to really grab the heat because it's all evaporated up. And it starts to get warm. And just like that, boom. Now, if you go back to that latent heat experiment, remember that one? How they were watching the temperature and they were throwing 20,000 BTUs at it and the temperature was pretty steady. All that heat was being absorbed by the water boiling. But what happened when there wasn't enough water left? What happened to the temperature? Anybody remember? Temperature went up, sensible heat started to show because there was no more water to absorb that heat energy in a latent form. All right, cool. So that one's pretty simple. Undercharged is the answer. If you got that, that's the correct answer. Now, fault 3, customer states AC cools well on the highway, but not round town. All right, right there. Let's just say that you were the MLT, the master lube tech. If the AC works on the highway, but it doesn't work around town, do we already have like kind of an idea what might be wrong?
Yes,
That's the fan.
it's always
Yeah.
the fan.
Right off the bat, we're already thinking the fan, but remember our documentation and the steps we take have to be able to hold up in court. So if you were to say it's the fan and charge diagnosis time, that's you might have a really good idea it's the fan, but you don't know it's the fan. So how are we gonna check it? Well, we're gonna at least pull the car in. Here we go. We're going to bug 3. We could jump in. Here's your ambient temperature. It's 100. Our static pressures look pretty good. You turn the AC on, and I don't know. The low looks good. What do you think about the high? Because it looked good static, right? But static doesn't test the system under operation. As soon as I turn the compressor on, you should not be seeing 350. 350 high. If 350 high, you could think overcharged, but if it's overcharged, your low would be too high and also your static would be too high. And see, the static's not really too high. Static's actually about where it should be. So if the high side's too high, but the low side's normal, that means the high side's too what? High and too, come on. Got a close relationship. Pressure and temperature, too high, too hot. Soon as you see the high side too high, means the high side too hot. So we go ahead, we get our temperature gun, and we're like, yeah, let me check this out here. Yeah. Oh, that's hot. You got 255 degrees here. 255 is that, you're not gonna be able to touch that. I mean, that's gonna be really hot. All right, and then you could go and you could check some other things. I mean, it's blowing pretty crappy ambient temperature. And again, remember, for us to get the evaporation and the condensation, we need these at the correct pressures. If the pressure is not correct, the system's not going to work right. So we could do some other things. We could check the scan tool, look at some whatnot. So if we were to check this out, one of the options was evaporator temperature sensors not in the correct section. So again, you guys saw how we could test that. You could hook up the scan tool. You can see what the temperature sensor's reading, like so. Look at the scan tool, the temperature sensor reading about 55. You could gun it. It's actually reading about 40. That's kind of interesting, but then again, I mean, it is warmer up here. So we'll give that a pass. I'm all over that fan thing. Why would a temperature sensor not in the right section cause it to be better on the freeway? It doesn't really make sense. Just with that alone, just with those few checks, I'd say the main reason we check it is to make sure it's not undercharged or overcharged. So we could eliminate 1 and 3 with that static pressure, right? And then we're looking at 2 and 4, and 2 actually didn't check out perfect, but 2 doesn't make a lot of sense. And there's actually a whole lesson there. Sometimes you'll find something that's maybe not exactly in spec, but sometimes you gotta back up and loosen up a bit and be like, it just doesn't really make sense with the concern. So like, you guys have figured out I end up working on all sorts of stupid stuff. And in my opinion, people who can actually troubleshoot problems is a very small percentage of the population. So like one of the things I had was a golf cart that was broken from a neighbor. And I told him, yeah, I'll give you the hookup. I'll check it out for you. And the issue was it wouldn't move. So I towed it over here with one of my other machines. I start looking at it, and like one of the first things I saw was he doesn't really maintain it. There's a lot of corrosion in the battery terminals. The tires are kind of low. It looks kind of beat up. But what was the customer's concern on this golf cart? It doesn't
Not
move.
moving.
That's it. So if my job is to pinpoint the root cause, right? Now, did I see some other things? Yeah. And did I say, well, corrosion on the battery terminals, that could cause some issues? Yeah, that could. However, corrosion on the battery terminals would cause like a voltage drop. And a voltage drop could be an issue, but for the cart not to move, it'd have to be like a massive voltage drop, like an insane voltage drop. If the cart's a little slow, if it's a starter on a car and it's cranking slow and you see corrosion in the battery terminals, that could make sense. But you could measure that, right? So I took my meter out and I measured voltage drop, and I'm dropping like well under a volt. I'm dropping like point something volts, not even 1 volt. So at that point, and by the way, that could be out of spec. To drop, let's make it a half a volt. If I'm dropping a half a volt on a connection of the battery, that's out of spec. But is dropping a half a volt gonna make the cart not move? No. So what I'm gonna do, in my mind, the way I've been trained, the way I've come up, and the way that I've understood how the business works, and I understand what the customer wants, and I understand what the business wants too, but ultimately they brought it to me to diagnose why it won't move. I don't have a right. I don't have any business telling him all the maintenance he needs to do. Makes sense? So that's what I'm trying to get you guys to understand. I don't have any business saying, well, your temperature sensor's reading 10 degrees off, because that's not the cause of the customer's concern. I don't have any business telling them, hey, you need to do all this maintenance on these batteries. I'm going to charge you to clean all this corrosion. I'm going to charge you to fix your tires. I'm going to charge you to fix your paint. I'm going to charge you to do all this stuff, because the customers say, is that going to fix my issue? And if I'm chicken, I'm going to say, well, I don't know, but we got to start with what we see. We got to start with the obvious. Like, okay, you could try to do that. But then someone like me who's going to be able to really troubleshoot is going to come in and say, well, look, if you got a problem, I'm going to diagnose exactly your problem and I'll fix it. And then after I fixed it, I feel like I've earned the right to sell them all their maintenance, right? Why would the customer pay money to do these maintenance items if the cart's still broken? Make sense? Well, you dropped your cart off and I charged you money and now you got clean battery terminals, but the piece of crap still doesn't move. Give me your money. That's just gonna upset people. You understand? So I want to make sure you guys get your perspective straight on when you're doing diagnosis. Sometimes you do find issues. Sometimes you see maintenance that's needed to be done. And it's not that we don't want to make the customer aware, but first and foremost, you address the problem. And if they're in for a concern, you better sell what's going to fix the concern first, and then say, oh, and by the way, you should do this, this, and this maintenance. And as a customer, because I'm a customer sometimes too, I'd say, well, as long as you know that your fix is going to repair the vehicle and my vehicle is going to move, my AC is going to work or whatever, then yeah, I'd be good with maintaining it. In a lot of ways, maintenance is one of the reasons it breaks anyway. Now, this golf cart had a completely non-maintenance related failure. This had a bad charging port. And the charging port would basically signal the computer that the charger's plugged in. If the charger's plugged in, the cart doesn't move. That's a safety feature. So I could have done all this maintenance and it still wouldn't have moved. And then a lot of people like to blame, the customer saying, well, you didn't do something, it's gotta be your fault, but like. The maintenance had nothing to do with the charging port failure. The charging port failure was just parts go bad, that's it, right? So. When I tell you these stories, it's to try to help you guys understand how you want to go about dealing with these problems. And if you can get to that level, then you'll be in the minority of people who can diagnose and fix problems. And in my humble but 99% guaranteed opinion, if you can troubleshoot and then you're in demand, you can make more money, you can throw your weight around a little bit more with an employer because you're worth it. See what I'm saying? All right, so with that, you guys looking at bug number 3, we pretty much have eliminated one and 3. 2, we found an issue, but does that issue cause the customer concern? No. So doesn't that leave 4? Would you say 4 would cause the concern, but 2 wouldn't really cause the concern, even though maybe 2 is kind of an issue? Good. Bug number 3 is definitely 4. All right. Bug number 4. Here we go. 2014 Avalon customer states AC does not cool. Shocking. A lot of these have been similar. It's 90. All right. Let's go ahead and we'll peek at that one. Bug number 4. All right, I walk up to the car. I can check the static, but a lot of times we'll actually power the AC on, bust out the temperature gauge, thermometer. Yeah, it's blowing 82, 80, 88, 90. That's pretty crappy. That one's not great. All right. Anybody want to go ahead and, now that you're understanding what we're doing, go ahead and give me some advice on what we should check next?
Expansion valve.
Well, how are we gonna check that? Like, what tests can we do? I want to do tests more so than replace parts. Oh, Renee says in the chat, the low side's too low. I agree. If we put the gauges on there, that low side being at a 9 or an 8, and that high side, well, that high side might look a little bit low too, but that low side is like really low. It's kind of interesting. Let's go ahead, turn this back off. Does it seem like at 90 degrees, based on what you've observed with that chart, does it seem like a 103 degrees, 103 PSI is going to be an undercharged? Because it seemed for a second like it could be undercharged, right? Low refrigerant level will make a low pressure. But on static, it actually looks pretty normal. So that's a little tricky, huh? What other things can we check? Anybody else got any ideas? What do you think? Oh, give me that. Give me that, baby. Get on down here. What other things can we check? All right, well, we can go ahead and run around like crazy with our temperature gun if you want. Like these seem reasonably good. We got a 110 there. Whoa, 5 degrees. I've never seen a 5. Anybody, we've never seen a 5 on an evaporator. That's kind of interesting. And there's a visual cue here. We're showing actually bubbles right here. It's kind of interesting. All right. But the compressor's running, so let's take a look at our options here. If we were to take a peek at our options, this need up here. Air in the system, undercharged, or economy, I think we can eliminate. Because Brandon jumped in and threw us the answer, but we didn't do a good job of explaining how we got there. So if it's air in the system, we discussed that once, that would most likely give us some pop-offs or some high spikes. So I didn't see that. I think we eliminate that. Undercharged, we talked about, right? On static, it was in spec, so not uncharged. Economy mode's an interesting one. Economy mode, a lot of times, if you have a variable displacement compressor, that'll have the compressor work a little less, like it won't stroke the piston all the way, and it might make a little bit of a lazy reading. A lazy reading meaning the low won't be drawn that low and the high won't be pumped that high. So if it was a lazy reading, what would you expect? Does this look like a lazy reading? Because the high is not really that high. The high is kind of low, actually, for 90 degrees. But is the low kind of lazy? Like lazy meaning they're similar. If the high side was 130 and the low side was maybe like 80, that might be a lazy compressor. Like they're not pumped that far apart. Make sense? Picture the system. Your compressor right here is pumping. It's drawing the low side low if it's strong. It's driving the high side high if it's strong. And assuming the TXV is working correctly. But if the compressor's kind of worn out, these little pistons and the little sealing rings, all that stuff are kind of beat, it's like a high mileage engine, it's not going to make that much compression. So it's not going to pump the high side as high. That's not, the high side right there is not that high. I like that. That might be a compressor on economy mode or a compressor that's kind of worn out. But the low, no, a worn out compressor doesn't draw the low side below 10. That's like totally weird. How could the low side be almost into a suction state? Hey, you know what makes sense? It was that restriction, wasn't it? If the expansion valve is restricted, that would cause the low to be too low. Would you guys agree with that? Anybody got any follow-ups for that, or you feel decent? Feel like that one was all right? I think that one was all right. Okay, so if that's the case, we'll do 4 for number 1. How about we go to number 5? Type 14 Sienna, customer states AC's in op. Okay. That sounds like customer complaint. They just say an op. We don't know if it's blowing warm, not blowing at all. We have no idea if the blower motor works. You don't know anything about it. So what do we do as technicians? We get our butts in the car. Go. Alrighty, we turn the AC on, we hit it with the temperature gun, and hey, it's 85 outside, and it's blowing at 81, 85, 85. This is essentially blowing at ambient. Wait a minute, look at what these are doing something here, aren't they? These are like oscillating back and forth. But the compressor clutch is pumping. All right. We can check our static pressure. What do you guys think about our static reading? At 85 degrees, should we have 95 PSI? Guesstimate. What do you guys think? Anybody care to share? At 85. What do you think? Does that sound reasonable? Well, if you don't remember, I can help you to recall. At 85, 70, 80, 85, running up to about here. Or about 60, 70, 80, 90. Yeah. About 90 something. About 90 something. Right? About 90 something. So it seems like probably the refrigerant is charged correctly. Let's take a peek at our options one more time. So undercharged would be eliminated. Right? Now, in an condenser fan, what does that usually cost? High, right? Is this high side too high? And definitely not too high. So now we also know it's not the condenser fan. So we're left with broken read or air in the system. Both of those are kind of interesting. So let's jump back to it. Remember, I told you what air in the system would do, but air in the system doesn't normally cause as much of an issue on the low. It's kind of like, um, it's kind of like your tires. The reason that you jump in the car and your tires are at 32 and then you get on the freeway and they're at 39, that's because there's moisture in the system. That doesn't happen if there's no moisture in the system. The problem is there's moisture in the air we pump in the tire because we're pumping it out of the compressor and the compressor's pulling out of the atmosphere and it's humidity. So if you did it with nitrogen, actually, you wouldn't have that big of a temperature swing, but it's a major temperature swing when it gets hot, right? So if it was just the hot side spiking way up, I might consider going with air. And if you thought it was air, by the way, you could recover the system, draw it into a vacuum, leave it at vacuum for a long time. Probably be a good idea to replace that receiver dryer desiccant. And then charge it back up and you'll have eliminated that, but you'd waste a lot of time. So I'm kind of thinking another one. If both sides are pulsing and our high side, if you look at these numbers, our high side is not spiking way up. It's oscillating, yes, but what would you guys say about that high side pressure? Is that too high? That's definitely not too high. That if that's way too low, I mean, it's not even getting 150. So one of those two answers would cause it to not get that high. What do you think about the broken reed valve in the system, in the compressor? If the reed valve was broken, that would mean the compressor would pump the refrigerant out, but unfortunately the refrigerant would leak back in because the reed valve was broken. Now, when it tries to pump it into the high, but it loses that refrigerant from the high side pressure drops. But it doesn't go to nowhere. It bleeds down into the low, so the low side pumps up, right? So if you look at that again, this reed valve is actually the compressor's trying to pump, the reed valve is letting it come back through and go into the low side. That's why your low side is spiking up to 90. Your 90 on the low side is horrible. Your 90 on the high side is horrible too. They're both horrible. And it's not because the compressor clutch is kicking on and off. It's just that compressor's shot. The compressor's got a broken reed valve. Everybody agree with that? Anybody got any questions on that? Feel decent? Not very good, not bad. Everybody clear on the moisture? Like Renee, you want any clarification on the moisture? We can shoot it. You feel good? We'll roll it. Let's go 6 then. Customer states, it's a nice RAV4. AC does not cool. Note, customer has attempted DIY repairs. Yeah, you know the crappy thing is, most of the time the customers aren't going to tell you that. But hey, that was great input. Props to the service advisor. Nice job. Okay, here we go. Roll out to the car, put the AC on, check the temperature. 47, 48, 49. It was 6, right? Yeah. What do you guys think about those numbers? 47, 48, 49?
High side is too high.
Yeah, I think, oh, you know what? 48 doesn't sound bad, but it's only 80 degrees out. So this is actually a great lesson. And, today we went to the region and we heard a lot of great input. I always appreciate talking with the STS and the FTSs. If you were to go out to this car and you were to feel the air with your hand, you'd be like, AC blows cold. What would you put in the repair order? Somebody want to share? What would you say? Good to go? More than likely, you know what you'd say? I'll put in the chat. NPF. No problem found. Now this was really good for me to hear from some of the people there. She's a manager of the FTS and STSs, and she said she's had to go to court for lemon law buyback stuff where these customers are trying to get their cars bought back and they're trying to defend it in front of a group of jurors, and your technician stories are put up on a board, so all the jurors can see them, and they can sit, they can try to understand, is the car a lemon? Should they force to buy back, or is it okay? And she said she's had to try to defend lemon law buyback cases when all the technician wrote were 3 letters, NPF. So if we rolled out and you felt this and it was like, oh, the AC's cold, NPF, no problem found. Now that wouldn't be the case on this because we know this customer did DIY repairs, but just consider the lesson there. NPF, what could you do better to demonstrate that you actually tried to duplicate the concern or you tried to verify the customer's problem? What would you do on this car? Yeah, you could actually measure the temperatures. Give me some actual temperatures. Now, the problem is 48 sounds pretty darn good. But actually on an 80-degree day, 48 is not great. I mean, this is a relatively dry, relatively cool day. We should be able to probably get lower than 48. So if you weren't exactly sure how cold it could blow, let me help you understand. In service information, it doesn't give you a number. TIS will not give you a number like 48 is good because that number depends on your ambient temperature. It depends on your humidity. So, and you could probably find a chart somewhere, but even that is not specific to this 2013 RAV4. So let's make it a 2023 RAV4 because these are getting old, but they're still amazing. So let's just say it was a 2023 RAV4 and it was blowing 48. What could you do to tell if that RAV4 had a problem or not? What are you going to compare it to now? That's what I'm asking you.
Compare it to
Another one in the
model.
parking lot.
Exactly. If you roll out and you find a 2013 or a 2023, maybe even a brand new 24, and you do a temperature check and it's 48 on the customers and it's 48 on the new one, please document that. This lady from the region, Michelle, was like, if you could explain what you've done, they can defend you. You're most likely never going to end up in court, by the way. Basically, your notes are what the FTS uses to defend the lemon law thing. So if you wrote, I went out to the parking lot, I checked this car with this VIN number and it blew this temperature, that's winning the case right there. But just to say NPF, that's losing the case right there. Make sense? Now I understand sometimes it's hard to get paid, to do that type of stuff and whatever, but if you're going to take this job seriously and you're going to be, and you want to be the master of your craft, you're going to really have to put some extra time in. Sometimes you can get paid pretty well if you can document it well as Z time. But you have to document that. And Toyota does give more support than other manufacturers, my experience. It's just, if you document it well and you don't get paid, you could actually probably talk to the FTS and say, hey, I got this AC concern and I couldn't duplicate it, and I can either slap an NPF on it and ship it, or like what I did was I went out to another car, I started it, I verified it, I ran it, I recorded this temperature, I recorded that temperature, and you could even go a step above and beyond if you want to be the foreman someday and say, I talked with the customer, I brought the customer out, I showed them the gauge on this car, I showed them a gauge on their car, they were the same, we discussed it for a bit. That could take you over a half an hour. But that could be A, the difference between lemon law, and B, that customer is going to see you're not just trying to pull the wool over their eyes, right? You're showing to them their car doesn't have an issue. Kind of makes sense. So that'd be a good one. If we went out to that car and that other RAV4 blew at 39 degrees and theirs is blowing at 48, now we got to look a little further, right? So this could have been an NPF. But the problem is we went and verified it. And we're like, you know what? The other one's blowing 9-10 degrees cooler. There is a problem with this car. Now, Brandon jumped the gun here. You're looking at this 250. 250 could be fine if it's 100 out. 30 could be fine if it's 100 out. Now we turn these off. Look, you're getting about 103, 104 static. Take a look at this. If it's 80 out, we should be about static pressure of what? 60, 70, 80? It should be 80 PSI. What do we have? 104 or something? If you wanted the exact number, remember we could, we can't with the power turned off. Either way, I agree, it's way high. So if your static is too high, there's only one possibility. You don't even have to get all upset about the other ones. You can just go ahead and say, oh, it is, what do you think about A? What do you think about number one? It's overcharged. It's done. Makes sense why it says customer has attempted DIY repairs, huh? Right? Now, this was kind of wrong though. Customer state does not cool, but that's typical. Service advisors are lazy. Customers don't always give the details. They're going to put what the customer says, and you're going to have to do a little bit of your own research. Cool. System is overcharged is a good one, a good one, a good one. All right, 7, Camry. Customer states AC doesn't cool well at times. And there's a reduced airflow from the vents. Note, and this is a nice one. So this service advisor, you suck. This service advisor, nice job. Saying the evaporator core was recently replaced. Just to let you know, customer was in, we did an evaporator core type of thing. That's going to be a big clue right there. So we go to the car. Numero 7. Turn the AC on. Temp gun. It's 41, 41. Shoot, this thing's freezing. Don't you think? What was the concern again? Remind me. Oh, it doesn't cool at times. So you might have to put a little bit more time in this one, right? If it's an intermittent issue, you might have to babysit it, drive it, mess around with it, you might say, hey, when is it not cool? What do you have to do? Whatever. I just looked at a truck yesterday for a noise that a mechanic told him was a muffler. And he said, you think it's a muffler? I have to hear the noise. You know what I mean? I got to verify it. So he brings it over and it doesn't make the noise. And he says, what should I do? Well, I got to really verify your concern if I'm going to tell you what's to do. And he says, oh, it only does in the morning. All right, cool. I'll come to your house tomorrow morning. He started, it made the noise for like a second. And I was like, man, you got an intermittent issue. Like, it's really tough for me to tell you. And he said, well, I'm thinking about just getting a muffler. I said, cool. You buy a muffler, we put the muffler on. If it fixes it, great. If it doesn't fix it though, I'm letting you know, I haven't properly diagnosed your noise because it did it for a second. And I can't really spend a whole bunch of time on this one. So figure out kind of like what you want to do. If you're good with it, then we can go with a best guess, but I'm explaining it's a best guess. So this one so far hasn't really acted up, has it? So if I get the temp gun, 41, 41, 41, that's pretty cool. And they're saying it doesn't blow cool at times. Okay, if I turn it off, let's look, we got about 80 degrees. At 75 outside, reading 80 degrees, that's telling me that this is charged about right. If you were to look here, you'd find out that I'm correct. All right, so then we would take a look maybe at our possibilities again. 7 is where we're at, okay. Well, wait a minute, this says reduced airflow from the vents too. That's interesting. And that the evaporator was recently replaced. Okay, those are interesting things. Undercharged and overcharged, would you agree? Those are out. Those are out because we just checked the static pressure. I can again check it. This thing's still not really acting up. I'd like to see it act up. But if it doesn't act up, you know, I could say, well, we could still try to find it. Sometimes I will and sometimes I won't, but like in AC, you know, sometimes we can find some things just based on the concern. So if it's a reduced airflow and it's after work was done, but the work specifically was that the evaporator was replaced. It's kind of interesting. Anybody think of any tests we could do to eliminate something? Especially one of these two, right? Because we're kind of left with 3 and 4. If the TXV is stuck open, what would you expect? The high side wouldn't get as high because it'd be bleeding through. And the low side wouldn't get as low because it's getting plenty of refrigerant coming through. It won't suck it down to quite as low. So I don't think it's going to be an evaporate. I don't think it's going to be a TXV. What did you think about that other one there? What about this? How can we test this? I showed you that on like number 1 or 2, didn't I? How can we test that? Come on with it. Scan tool. Evaporator temp sensor reads what? So let me give it to me.
58.
I get the temp gun and I read 41. I read 20 down here. 20 on the actual evaporator. How could that temperature sensor be reading 58 if the evaporator is 20 stinking dirty ding dang degrees?
Sensors
And it's in the wrong place. And doesn't it make sense because there was work recently done? There's work recently done. Yeah, an evaporator was done. And they pulled the sensor out. And so it makes perfect sense that they didn't put it back in, or it's laying in the box or something. So that makes a lot of sense. Now, this was a great question because if you were to just sit there and wait for the car to act up, it may never act up for you. It might have to be, driven for a long time. And if the evaporator temperature sensor is reading 58, it's going to continue to try to cool. And if it cools too much, what's going to happen to the moist air that hits a very ice cold 20-degree evaporator?
Freeze.
It's going to ice over. Exactly. When it freezes and ices over, don't you see how that's going to restrict the airflow? So that one actually makes a lot of sense. Restricted airflow. That one's totally legit. This is a good question. In fact, a lot of these questions they all demonstrate a really good concept and they're pretty well written if you ask me. So I would go with 3. Now let's jump to 7. Sorry, that was 7. 8. 2012 Camry AC doesn't cool well on hot days. And it's had multiple compressor replacements. Okay. Interesting. Oh, let's pull it in. Alrighty, well, we got ourselves a hot day at 105. AC on, temp gun, it blowing 85. Now 85 is better than 105, but 85 sucks. So we could check static pressure. We're showing about 120 on here. 120 is probably about right. It's 95. Probably be here. Run it over. Well, maybe, yeah, that's about right. It should be maybe like 115. So it might be a touch high, but not enough to cause what we got. Remember the lesson? Like, yeah, you might have found something there. It might be a little overcharged, but that's not going to cause this thing to only blow at 85. If it's a little overcharged, it might cause a little warm. And you'll notice on Toyotas, a lot of times they have a range. It might say 470 kilograms plus or minus 30 kilograms. Like there is a little bit of a range. So I'm gonna say let's let that roll. What else? Anybody got any ideas what we could check? You can check some of these if you'd like. Maybe we could check the condenser. That seems a little warm right there. What else could we check? Just remember what we got. It's either overcharged, too much oil, condenser fan and up, expansion valve is stuck open. Anything we can eliminate right now? Be quite honest with you, there's a big clue in knowing that the work history. Okay, expansion valve stuck open can be eliminated. I agree. If the TXV was stuck open, that would have the high not that high and the low not that low. And this high is really high and this low is really low. They're probably actually in spec for 105. So I agree. I think we can eliminate those. I think we can eliminate overcharged. So if we can eliminate 4 and 1, that leaves us with 2 and 3 as a possibility. Now, how could we eliminate the condenser fan thing? First off, on a real car, how would you know if the fan works or not?
You just check it.
Yeah, just look at it, listen to it. Yeah, exactly. So with this, we could get the temp gun out. We could be like, yeah, that looks pretty hot. But I don't know, down here, 190, 170, it seems like it's kind of hot coming in. And that would make sense because it's a freaking 105 and it's 300 PSI. Right? That's gonna be pretty hot. But it's losing a lot of its heat. It's burning the heat off. It drops from 245 to 170. So that fan's got to be working. And that leaves us with an interesting one. And to be honest with you, again, this is an amazing question because how do you know that there's too much oil in the system? You can't really tell. All you can do is do process of elimination. You're like, well, the condensers work, fan is working, the compressor is working good, the TXV is working, this is this and this and this is working. But hey, what happened in the past, right? So some of this isn't about staying in the car. Some of it's about knowing, hey, I see a brand new compressor on there. Tell me about that. Who did that? Who did that? And did they realize when you put a new compressor on there that a lot of the brand new compressors come with all the oil for the whole system in there already? So if you yank the compressor out and that original oil from the original compressor is still deposited a little bit in the evaporator, a little bit in the condenser, a little bit in the receiver dryer, you yank it out, you put a new one in, and that new one has a full 8 ounces again. You might have 13, 14 ounces kicking around in there. Now and then you do that again because it said multiple, right? It didn't say the compressor was replaced. It said multiple. So we're talking at least there's been 3 in there. Because we don't count the original. Now, if that's been the case, this thing could easily have double or triple the amount of oil in the system. Why is that potentially going to cause the AC to blow warm right there, right? Because the AC blows warm, it sucked. That's crap. Remember, it's all about evaporation in the evaporator and condensation in the condenser. That's why we run refrigerant. Refrigerant evaporates and condensates at the correct temperatures for our system. Oil doesn't do that. So if you have too much oil in the system, that's going to take up space and that's going to not change states. Remember? So we're not getting the cooling just because this feels cool. We're getting the cooling because this is evaporation inside. And that's absorbing massive amounts of BTUs in latent heat form, not in sensible heat. So that oil's not evaporating. You got refrigerant coming in this evaporator, cool. But it's way less refrigerant than it used to be. And now it's just a bunch of oil. And the oil just gets circulated. It doesn't change state. So you lose a lot of cooling. Make sense? So the answer on that one, too much oil in the system. Let's go with 9. 2013 Corolla, customer states AC cools intermittently. It's okay, but sometimes it's hot. Intermittent, hot, cold, kind of depends. And by the way, I wrecked it and then was at the body shop for a month. Basically, that's what I'm talking about. Cool. Now today it's 80, cloudy, and raining. All right, I'm just letting you know right now. This is probably in the south. In the south, those days they get hot, but like not crazy California desert type of heat. Like Death Valley is the hottest, reliably, effectively like certified temperature in the world. We have the record, I think 134. Some people question it, by the way. 130's been like extensively verified. And in some other areas, like Algeria, supposedly they had higher ones, but the station wasn't really official. So the temperatures out here are the hottest in the world in Death Valley. But the South has different type of heat. If it's 80 and so humid it's raining, basically if it's raining, I'm letting you know the temperature, the humidity is 100%. 80 and 100% humidity is gonna suck. That's not gonna be fun. It's be kind of nasty. It sounds like it's in the South where it's humid. That's a big clue right there too. So let's go with that number 9. Jump in the car, turn the AC on, check it. Blowing 45, that's all you could ask for, really. Because that's the thing, it's humid there. The AC doesn't work as well when it's humid there. 45 on an 80-degree day would not be great for Southern California. 45 in high humidity on 80 degrees, that's actually, I don't know. I don't know if I really object. But what was the concern again? Oh, sometimes. Now it's blowing 70. 78, 79. No, that sucks. That AC's an op. Now, what do you want to do? Just think about it, consider it, weigh it out, go over the possibilities. How about we check the static? We got about 88 PSI at an 80-degree day. What do you think? Is that under or overcharged? I think we can eliminate 3 and 4. Those are done. Right? Just checking static pressure, done, knocked out. So now we're left with moisture in the system or air in the system. All right, cool. Let's take a look at there. Turn the AC on. Remember I told you, if there's moisture, sometimes it'll make the high side, if there's air with moisture, sometimes it'll make the high side kind of like pop off. But other times you want to consider, the only real reason that air is a major problem is because it doesn't condense and it doesn't evaporate, so that could cause it to blow warm. But the real concern with the air is that the air has moisture in it. So the fact that we're worried about air or moisture is more like they go together. See, so air is a problem because it brings moisture. Moisture is a problem. Yeah, it could cause corrosion, it could cause whatever, and it might, but the AC is not going to work long before then, and it's going to be in the shop long before it causes those long-term damages. Now take a look. This one was good, now it's bad. What's your low side? Ooh, it came back. What was your low side reading when it was bad? Did anybody catch that? Right now it's reading 22. 22 is good. 175 on the high and 22 on the low. That's good for 80 and humid. By the way, these are like ASE numbers. This is Virginia right here. Good old Leesburg, Virginia. Interesting. Okay, these are not good. Your low side should not be just about 0 or 1. Exactly. Now, why would the low be so low? I think you already know because we were talking about moisture, right? But how could moisture cause the low to be low? I'll give you a clue. Let's follow where the moisture goes. The moisture comes here, kind of boils. Now it's steam, vapor. Moisture goes here. The moisture hits this sucker. Now let's look at temperatures. Now at this moment, not that cold. All right. But it's working good right now. So after the TXV, before the TXV 114, after the TXV 27, yeah, if the moisture hits that 27, it might kind of freeze, huh? That's below 32. But what do you think happens now when it's 5? Right? It's 86 and 5. Doesn't this seem restriction to you? Is anybody else feeling restriction right here? This is hot and this is cold. Freezing cold. 5 degrees is way too cold. And your low side is way too low. Those make sense. That's a restriction. Question is, why is the restriction there? And then the restriction's gone. Thinks they can explain that to me. I told you a story about this already. Remember? In the station wagon with the family. Exactly. That moisture comes and hits that TXV, ices the needle over, causes a big restriction. The low side drops too low. The high side for a second would probably spike too high. Right? Because it's a restriction. Don't you think the high would be too high and the low would be too low? And you're right, it would be for a second. But then think about this. The compressor is trying to draw from the low, but it can't pull enough refrigerant through, so it can't sustain a high side when it doesn't have any refrigerant to build the high side up. Make sense? So for a second, yeah, it'd be slammed up high, pulled way low. Then really after a second or two, the high side wouldn't really be that high anymore, and the low side would still be too low. Exactly right. The moisture is hitting the TXV needle and freezing, at which point the system doesn't really work. And by default, the evaporator and the TXV area get warmer and melted until it makes its rounds again. What was wrong with this car, or what prompted that, do you guys think? What caused that whole situation in this car? It's in the body shop. The body shop had the condenser out of it and left the lines hanging there. You could tape the lines if you want. You could put tape over them, bag them, tag them, seal them up. They're not going to be that sealed. When you're done with that car that came from the body shop, that needs a really nice long vacuum. Probably realistically, it needs a desiccant bag, receiver dryer, accumulator desiccant, something like that, right? Because that desiccant was sitting there absorbing that moisture all the time, and plus it was raining, it was humid, it was in the south, you know. That system is taking all the moisture it can handle, it's done. And now it's freezing up the needle. Cool, so that was 9. 10, this one gets a lot of people, by the way. 13 Camry, customer states AC won't turn on, 100 degrees, and 60% humidity. It's a little humid for my personal taste. So here we go for the number 10. We're looking at bug number 10. Okay. Already checking the static, you know, there's a clue there. Looks like it's 100, it's 20. I'd say, can we eliminate anything on 10? What do you think about number 2? Can we eliminate number 2? Anybody think they know? Yeah, definitely. If there's no refrigerant in the system, you're gonna have like a 0 static pressure. All right, cool. So that one's out. So open in the mag clutch, inaccurate flow sensor, AC amplifier is bad. Okay, we turn the AC on. What happened? What happened? I turned the AC on. Did the compressor kick? Clutch didn't engage. There you go. Jimmy got him. It's 100, it's 100, it's 100 everywhere because this is all the static pressure. Yeah, you push the button and the button's green, but it didn't kick the compressor, so static pressure is all you got. Matter of fact, static pressure is all you're gonna get because it's static. The compressor's not moving anything. Now, anybody feel like they have a useful thing that we can check or test on this one? Because this one was a tricky one. A lot of people get stuck on 10. What do you think? The green, okay, just a second. The green light doesn't flash is a good point. If the green light's not flashing, we don't have an issue here, do we? So green light not flashing means we can cross off 1, right? Because remember, if we have a fault in the magnetic clutch circuit, the green light flashes. Cool. So we can eliminate 1 and 2. Now we're between 3 and 4. And you know, it's not to say that either one of these aren't possible, but the AC amplifier bad's a tough thing to test. Remember, there's a saying I've said before, all diagnostic roads end at the ECU. You're like, what the heck does that mean? Well, when it's an ECU, you're eliminating everything else. And if everything checks good and it's still not functioning, then that's when you'd more say it's an ECU, right? So generally, we never jump to number 4. We never jump to the ECU. If we're thinking it might be a problem with the flow sensor, Marty called it. I agree. We can check the scan tool and check that out. That's interesting. 0 amps. And the flow sensor, 3.28 volts. The regulator pressure sensor, that makes sense, right? 128, because that's about 128. Evap 10 sensor at 100, that's exactly what we measured with the thermometer, right? Right there, 100, 100. So we're between the flow sensor at 3.28 volts and the regulator control current at 0 amps. And then if we were to go ahead and look here, inaccurate flow sensor is one of the options. Well, the problem is we'd actually have to read some of the reference material, which I do have here, and it would actually explain to us a bit more about how the flow sensor works. And so you might dig in new car features or one of these places and understand refrigerant flow sensor. Okay, a 3-wire refrigerant flow sensor mounted on some AC compressors displayed in volts. Okay, didn't really give us a ton of information though. Okay, looking good, looking good. It talks a lot about how the refrigerant pressure changes, liquid and vapor. But you know what? I didn't feel like we got a great, and by the way, this right here, when it talks about humidity, this can help you to determine what your AC might blow at, but you see it gets a little bit complicated, and generally we don't really use this one so much. So temperature differential between inlet and outlet, along with relative humidity. So it's saying you might, if your relative humidity is higher, you're actually going to get less temperature difference. Okay, kind of interesting stuff, but it didn't really give us a ton of information on that flow sensor. So this is what I would do if this was my vehicle. If I didn't exactly know, but I had another vehicle there. Right? Oops, I'm scrolling on the wrong area. If I had another vehicle there, I'd jump in and I'd say, well, let me check this other car. This flow sensor is reading at 2 volts, and the compressor's amped up the regulator current. This one's reading at 1 volt and it's amped up the regulator current. This one's reading at 1.51 volts and it ramped up the current. And then let's go back to the fault car. This one's reading at 3.28 volts and it's commanding as a result the regulator control current to be 0. So I'm going to explain this to you, but I openly admit the information we got doesn't explain that sensor very well. What I do want to remind you is all of these 3-wire 5-volt sensors have a 5-volt reference and a ground, and then that middle wire is going to vary typically between a 0.5 volt and a 4.5 volt, but it's going to be varying depending on whatever it's measuring. So if it's measuring pressure, maybe low pressure is 0.5 and high pressure is 4.5. If it's measuring flow, maybe low flow is 0 volts and high flow is 0.5 volts and high flow is 4.5 volts. It's never going to be 0. It's never going to be 5, right? Because we never have to go to those extreme ends because that's what's going to set a DTC. 3.28 volts is the highest reading we've seen. The way this sensor works, the more flow there is, the higher the voltage will be. So if there's a lot of flow, what's it going to do to this variable displacement compressor? There's already plenty of flow. What's it going to do? it's gonna back it off, right? So this one may or may not have a clutch, but if it's a variable displacement, it's gonna actually not make those pistons do full stroke. So if the pistons aren't stroking, don't you think the low and the high side are gonna be the same? Because they're not stroking. This compressor is basically in op. But this compressor is not in op because the compressor is no good. This compressor is not being commanded. See, you're looking at regulator control current. It's not being commanded on. Look, it's 0 amps. Do you agree? You guys all follow what I'm saying? Now, if you were to go in the scan tool, you might, in the text stream, you might be able to command this to have, 1 amp, 0.997 amps, and it would probably kick the AC on strong, but I don't know if it would let you because it's already seeing a lot of refrigerant flow. It's seeing a lot of refrigerant flow because the sensor's defective. The sensor's reading way more refrigerant flow when it has no refrigerant flow. Make sense? So this one, you really needed the tech stream. The tech stream is what fixed this vehicle. Knowing how that sensor works and looking at it. If you don't know how it works, read about it. If you can't find the information you need, hopefully you can compare it to a known good, like we did in this example. All right, so that gets you through all of them. How'd you guys feel? That one, if you followed what I'm saying, we're putting an inaccurate flow sensor. We're not saying an AC amplifier because we can't verify the AC amplifier is bad if the flow sensor is reading inaccurate and the AC amplifier is commanding 0. It's not the AC amplifier's fault. Make sense? Tell me, did you guys have so much fun? Is this one getting you in the diagnostic state of mind? Because that's a big part of where we're at. Tomorrow, as you guys know, is the last real day for diagnosis. So if you have any diagnosis cards that you're trying to still figure out, get them there tomorrow. Because Wednesday, we're into full-fledged ASE prep review. Okay?
My mom says her Odyssey, funny enough, the same year as Aiden's, is it takes a while to get cold, so I was thinking of bringing it in for that.
Bring it in. Any
Sounds good.
diagnosis you guys have, bring it in. Bring the diagnoses. That's Tuesday. Wednesday, remember, we're on ASE prep. So it's the last hurrah. And then Thursday, I'd love to say we're gonna do more ASE prep, but remember that's the graduation, so that's not gonna happen. I'll give you guys a little bit more ASE prep time on Zoom, even technically after the class ends, if needed. All right, let's see how Wednesday goes. We'll see how you feel. If we feel like we're not quite there, I could do more. Okay. Any questions for me? Is there class on Thursday? Let me talk with you about that tomorrow.